Hello and welcome to Decoding Bengaluru. This conversation coming to you from the St. Joseph's College in Garden City on a warm and sultry summer evening that we're not used to in Bangalore, in front of a live and lovely audience who will join us in this conversation. Often when you think of Bengaluru as the IT capital, it's the image of the Silicon Valley-inspired, globe-trotting, dollar-earning techie that comes to mind. Yet when you think Karnataka, especially in election season, it's the social equations, caste arithmetic, and grassroots realities that dominate the narrative. How does the former relate with the latter? Is there a sense of disconnect, or is there a sense of deep understanding? To understand and answer these questions, I have with me a man who deals with both these worlds on a daily basis. The grassroots politicians, as well as the tech giants in India. Rajeev Chandrashekar, Minister of State for Entrepreneurship, Electronics and Information Technology, a prominent Bengalurian himself. Thank you so much, Rajeev, for being with us. Also with us this evening, a panel of stellar Bengalurians. Jaya Jagdish, a country head of AMD, Manish Sabarwal, a big name, co-founder of Team Lease and chairman, Sindhu Gangadharan, managing director of SAP, and my good friend, honorary director of the Bangalore International Center, V. Ravichandar. Well, my opening question to the panel, and that's to Rajeev Chandrashekar, to understand the techie and the mindset and their relationship with the rest of the city, is does the techie, as a social term, relate more with Bay Area in San Francisco than with the harsh realities of Baipura and Pura in Bengaluru city?
So, look, I can't speak for the techies, but I certainly know many of them, and I don't think it's as binary as that. I think at the core of it, every Bengalurian is a Bengalurian, regardless of whether you're a techie or you're a pensioner or you're a government servant or you've got some other profession or business in Bengaluru. But it's certainly the case that amongst the tech fraternity, there are a lot many more people who are, let's say, passing through Bengaluru. And so therefore, their views about Bengaluru politics or Bengaluru development may not be as developed as or as passionate as, let's say, many other Bengalurians. And I don't see that as necessarily a problem as much as it is just par for the course. But as politicians and as people in public life, we do try and engage with people and say, look, even if you are just a visiting resident of Bengaluru, don't let that discourage you or make you think of yourself as somebody different and disconnected from the political process and the democratic process that is the underpinning of every city and every state in this country. So the degree of participation of a techie may differ, but I think at the heart of it, a techie or a non-techie, a Bengalurian is a Bengalurian.
But in terms of a relationship, in terms of understanding, in terms of identifying with a particular area or a culture, how does that work?
No, so this is a difficult question, and I hate, I hate to generalize. And I think different people have very different approaches to life, and I know many people who are non-techies who still have who are cynical about the political process. And so therefore, you don't have to be a technology participant or the tech space participant to be cynical about politics. I think that cuts through across the middle class and the upper middle class, across cities and geographies in India, that there is a certain apathy as you go up the economic strata. The apathy is, in a sense, directly proportional to how high up you are in the economic strata. If there is an equation like that, maybe there's a formula that can be created. So I don't think it's necessarily something unique to the tech space. But this disconnect from politics, especially local and state politics. And I think the participation numbers you see for a municipal election versus a state election versus a central national election tells you that story. The BBMP elections in Bengaluru have turnout rates of 37%, 38%. The national election has 67%, 68%. The state elections are somewhere in between. Actually, funnily enough, it should be the other way around. If you are deeply passionate about how you live, the standard of your life in a city, your participation and involvement in local politics ought to be the highest. So it is a conundrum. It is one of those let's say, dysfunctionalities in our democracy, but that is not unique to Bengaluru. It's the same story in Mumbai, it's the same story in Delhi, it's the same story in Kolkata and Chennai.
You're talking of urban voter apathy, and we will discuss the statistics as well. For instance, Bengaluru Central, only around 45% voter turnout in 2019. Just a few kilometers away, Bengaluru Rural gets about 60%. Now, why is that happening? Jaya, as the India leader of a global conglomerate, in your social circles, and I'm not talking as just a corporate leader, in your social circles, what's the bigger conversation? Is it some Apple product that's coming out of Silicon Valley, or are the social realities of India a matter for conversation in your offices, in your social spaces?
You know, from a technology point of view, yes, there is a great influence from the Silicon Valley that we get. We are influenced. We take the best practices. We take the technology from there. But, you know, Bangalore Design Center or any other location, regional design centers, pretty much have established their own unique identity. You know, and there is a culture that is very unique to that particular design center that develops over time. And it is never seen as an extension of the Silicon Valley, or we are just trying to mimic them. I mean, we are passionate about technology. We are passionate about getting state-of-the-art technology, getting that work here, and actually reaping the benefits of technology for India. And that's the passion I see with young techies in Bangalore. I mean, and it's people who are here have chosen to be here because all of them have opportunities to go outside. It's a personal choice to be here, to be part of this culture and make Bengaluru their home, right? And there is a reason for that. So when people stay here by their own choice, of course, they're well integrated into the system and they want to do their bit to the economy, to the region, to the development. And that's what I have seen and appreciated all along.
And interesting you say about people wanting to live here, but do they live, Manish Sabharwal, in gated communities where they create an example of the United States inside those communities which are walled and hence in a bubble? I'm playing devil's advocate here and I'm asking you this question. Is that idea of living here very different from what it actually is for a normal Indian to live here?
I mean, we don't live in an economy, we live in a society, so I think that's an unfair question. Even if you know, India exported more software than Saudi Arabia did oil in 2021 because of Bangalore. You know, Bangalore is a place, of course, but it's also an idea. I mean, if everybody in India lived in Bangalore, India's GDP would be more than China, right?
We have enough traffic already.
India's GDP is $2,500. Bangalore's GDP is probably $12,000. So I think it's important to recognize the role Bangalore has played or continues to play in the renewal of India's soft power. And for people living in Bangalore, it is. I mean, is Silicon Valley a place or is it an idea? I mean, are all sort of cities which have driven change, and cities are engines of change in some sense, right? I mean, even in India, we're struggling with the question of do you take jobs to people or do you take people to jobs? And I think Bangalore has been a job magnet for interstate migration, of course, but also intrastate migration. I mean, so I think that I don't think Bangalore is disconnected from the rest of Karnataka or the rest of India or from the rest of the world. And hopefully, there'll be many more Indian cities will be connected to India and their state and the rest of the world. I mean, I'm not sure there's a conflict. I think there's a trade-off in some sense. And, you know, India was a reckless experiment in 1947. The democratic experiment worked out fantastically. The economic experiment failed. And Bangalore represents the cutting edge of renewing that economic experiment because if our labor is going to be handicapped without capital and our capital is going to be handicapped without labor, see, India is 5th in the world in total GDP, but 138th in per capita GDP. And I think Bangalore just represents, and Karnataka in that sense, right? Karnataka and UP have the same GDP, but Karnataka does it with 1/4 the number of people. So per capita GDP or per capita productivity of the people here, the firms here, is much higher. So I wouldn't sort of, I mean, if you can partition between economy and society, you're welcome to try, but I think that's a fool's errand. It's not going to happen.
Interesting point that you make. So, Sindhu, when a global company looks at Bangalore, does it look at this 20 million, 2 million population that we're talking about? Or does it look at the larger Karnataka picture? I mean, what is it that defines the narrative from the point of view of how you relate with this Bengaluru city? Does the rest matter at all?
Well, I mean, if I just look at how the rest of the world is looking at Bangalore, there's no doubt that in terms of technology prowess, the area that I come from, right, is standing out. There's no doubt about it. And in addition to what was already said, that juxtaposition of multiple aspects, be it culture, be it a language, be it that within the country migration as well from different places, I think Bangalore has this very unique identity, which is also known in the rest of the world as we speak, right? So there's clearly no doubt in terms of seeing Bangalore as a power to reckon with. That's everywhere, no matter whether you go to Europe or US, everybody knows it as the tech capital of India. Everybody wants to be in Bangalore as we speak. It's no more, hey, is it nice to be there or not? Nobody is having those questions anymore. It's a place to be in. It's part of the agenda for pretty much every large organization out there. In fact, a lot of the decision making, and I'm talking about even mid-sized to large companies, happening out of Bangalore when it comes to technology, and deciding how things would evolve for the rest of the world for those organizations, right? So, I mean, if I just look at SAP ourselves, quarter of our IP, which is generated across the world, happens right out of here in India, right? And that's significant if you think about this kind of change in dynamics that's happened over the years. If I were to call out one particular thing which stands out for Bangalore, I think it's this can-do attitude, no matter what, right? And if I just look at the recent pandemic and what we went through, people did not just take care of themselves, but people went out of the way to see how best to use technology to help also the government of India, things like the oxygen digital tracking system, right? Building that out. I think that's that can-do attitude which shines through in everything that Bengalureans do, and particularly in the tech world, Veera.
Yeah, in many ways, that citizen activism that one has seen, and my friend Rajeev Chandra has been very closely involved in several conversations with the citizens as well. I'm trying to prime him to take a contrarian point of view as well. He speaks to a lot of the human resource officers as well. Ravi, so it's no bubble. Tech population doesn't live in a bubble, which is disconnected from the grassroots?
I would say that maybe a decade ago, but today I have a different view. I think it's changing, and it's changing slowly, but it's changing for the better in terms of being connected. I can't help commenting on your original question about Bangalore techie and Bay. Currently, I don't think the average Bangalore techie wants to be connected with the Bay Area given the layoffs there. This is a far better place to be in. So that is one. And the other point which also just struck me about the gated community. I always used to think, private splendor, public squalor, and they're two different worlds. But the recent flood showed one of the richest gated communities. The externalities hit them too. And suddenly you realize that we are all in it together. So the sense I get, and I think something that even the Minister Rajeev mentioned earlier, there are people who are invested in the city, and then there are also people who are transit. And I think you've got it, so no generalization will work. So there are people who are connected and there are people who are disconnected. And in election terms, there's another big issue when it comes to the techies. A lot of them have their votes outside Bangalore because they have not the portability to transfer that vote to Bangalore doesn't exist. So that's something we'll have to keep in mind as we talk about techies, elections, and the local area. I earlier used to think that the day off was the day they went to Nandi Hills or some other place. But I think that's changing. And to me, the telltale sign is, if you take some of the CSR activities of companies, you're finding these young techies, 2 years out of college, they're coming out in large numbers to get involved. I think Sindhu and Jaya will be able to tell us more. All those are signs of getting involved in a larger sense of what the community is, and this is where I live. So you're seeing that. I mean, it's what I would call, it's a thing in transition. Take time to really become a fully involved citizen. But, and the last point really is, the statistics that Rajeev said about corporation election to stay. The reality, I think, and this is a generalization I'm willing to stand by, there's a general feeling that the higher you go, the more easier it is to fix your problem. And the lower you go, it's a waste of time trying to go and vote. That kind of equation is there in people's mind.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you point out, and I'll put this to all the panelists. One of the interesting features that I see about this Bangalore citizen is that when there are potholes, when there are traffic issues, they come out on the roads and there is protests and whatever else that you see. But there is little reaction when there is a fuel price rise, or when there is inflation, or when there is a larger social issue. Now, given that the nature of issues that they protest for is actually something that gets fixed at the local level in a local government, what is the level of involvement that they have with that local system? And B, is there an understanding of how the system works? Let me take one after the other, starting with you, Rajeev.
I think, let me just take up from where Ravi left off. And I think democracy in India is a work in progress. And while we can certainly attest to the fact that democracy at the national level and national elections have taken on over the last 5-7 years or 9 years a certain degree of credibility, and there's a lot more trust in government. The same is not true for, let's say, the municipal corporation and municipal elections, and maybe in certain cases the state elections. And I think, and I completely agree with what he said. 10 years ago, or even 10, 12 years ago, when I spent a lot of money in trying to get people to turn out for a 2015 assembly the BBMP elections, I was met with apathy of the worst kind. But today, when I go and meet students in colleges, when I talk to young techies, there is certainly a qualitative increase in the awareness that an individual or a young techie or a young student has about the problems that he or she faces, her family or his family faces about Bengaluru. There is progress. But I think we must also accept that this lags the trust and the credibility that the national government has built. And therefore, I think it is really, in a sense, imperative on all Bengalurians that the same credibility about institutions and governance at the national level, we should work together to recreate at the municipal and the state level. And so I always say that this is really a work in progress. And I think this is a work in progress with some clearly positive slope in terms of the improvement. But that is not to say that we are not overly obsessed with transport versus sewage being ignored or solid waste management. That is not to say that there is certain rebalancing of priorities that are required. And techies per se, and Ravi knows this, and I've taken exception to this on multiple occasions. There is an over-obsession about certain issues which tends to leave the other issues sort of under the radar, outside the radar, below the radar. So I think that is a work in progress as more and more people enter this debate and discourse. These discussions about governance and government will no longer be unipolar, single-dimensional, and will start being slightly more. Fuel prices, potholes, sewage, solid waste management, all of them, law and order, all of them are equally important to the life of a citizen in a city. And I think that's happening.
Right. You point out an important point. Democracy is work in progress. And I'm just taking this conversation a little forward. And what puzzles me is this, right? When you talk of the techie, you are talking of the highly educated, the ones who mostly were educated in India, perhaps, if I may argue, the beneficiaries of the social movement and the progress that the country has made in field of education. What's the level of awareness of the system? And I'm not talking of whether you care or don't care. That's not the point. Everybody cares. But what's the effort that's been made to look at issues which are beyond just your immediate utility value? So Jaya, and then I'll get Manish as well.
Yeah. Well, the techies world, it's natural for them to focus on the things that impact them directly. So when you talk about fuel prices or potholes on the road, that's a direct impact that they are seeing. So hence the reaction is to kind of bring up those issues, which is natural. But one thing that we have to notice and also appreciate is this whole corporate culture is actually teaching our youngsters a lot of life lessons, right? We ask them to take responsibility, accountability, take charge. You're responsible for your job. And there is nothing that's offered on a platter. You earn your promotions or whatever based on your performance. So these are very valuable life lessons to these young techies that can actually translate to a much bigger role that they can play for the nation, right? And I agree with what our minister said. There is an increased faith and trust and lot more awareness that's being built in the new India.
So it's also work in progress.
Yes,
Manish?
it is work in progress.
I mean, power is reflected in funds, functions, and functionaries, right? For the first 70 years, one central government spent more than 29 state governments, right? Now, this year, roughly, central government spends about 39 lakh crores. 28 state governments spend about 45 lakh crores. But 2.5 lakh municipalities spend only 3 lakh crores. So, Indira Gandhi in 15 of her speeches said strong states lead to a weak nation. Actually, 29 chief ministers matter more than one prime minister. Maybe 100 mayors matter more than 29 chief ministers, but we don't have mayors, right? Ambitious politicians don't want to be mayors because they only have 3 lakh crores, while state governments
My question is, how many in the world that I'm talking about, this 2 million, would have this kind of resonance with the statistics that you're just reeling out? The level of understanding that you have.
All lives are local. I think you underestimate, I mean, a global citizen is a citizen of nowhere. I think we have to be careful when we sort of talk about global citizenship. I mean, lives are local in the end, and originally that's what politics was about. In 1924, Jawaharlal Nehru was the mayor of Allahabad, Vallabhbhai Patel was the mayor of Ahmedabad, Chittaranjan Das was the mayor of Calcutta. And I have letters talking of the street lights and of school teacher absenteeism. Those are the kind of local issues which matter to our lives. And I think, we have created the world's largest democracy on the infertile soil of the world's most hierarchical society. I mean, 3 million people in India win an election, 22 million people stand for an election. So I think you're underestimating political awareness. But when you keep using the word techies are a rounding error in India's labor force. They're 0.8% of India's labor force. They may produce 8% of GDP, but they are only 0.8% of India's labor force. And they'll probably be a rounding error even in Karnataka's population. So I think you may be overestimating their numbers.
So maybe I'm the sore one, right? Because in this panel, with the net worth that you guys have, I would possibly be the poorest in the panel, very clearly. And maybe I represent the other who's sore at the success of the techie. Is that also a sense that you get that outside the tech world, there is a sense of, angst about...
I feel there is a bit of education to be done outside the tech world. I could sense that a bit. I mean, if you just look at the numbers just from the digitization that's happening, or even for that matter, the urbanization or for the consumption that's happening in India, right? I mean, the numbers are just phenomenal in terms of not necessarily only techies driving that, but how technology is driving that, right? And that, I think, is an important piece to keep in mind.
I'm going to get a quick response from Ravi and then take a break, but that question of technology is what I'm going to focus next. How much is actually being done by which sector? We'll just discuss that. Ravi?
See, on awareness, I think the awareness is relatively low. Though I'm generalizing out here, the awareness of the kind of things that Manish spoke about, local government, how it functions, is low among the techies. If there's one thing I'd like them to do, and I think there's a limitation there, you will build more awareness if you can give time and time on the ground. You have to be closer to the ground issues to understand. But this is a digital generation. I mean, if this whole problem was dealing with digital trash, I think they would crack it. But this requires investment in the real world and time to come to grips with it. So that's really where the effort needs to be made. But if I have to be asked, do they have enough awareness of all these things to a great level? That clearly too is a work in progress. But as Rajeev said, I would totally agree, the slope is positive. Things are getting better out there.
In 2014, we saw one very big name from techie try and contest an election. Nandan Nilekani. He had the courage to go and put himself to test before the electorate. My question is, and I'm not saying it has to be done, it's urban apathy. You don't expect corporate leaders to come into politics. But is it just a matter of time before we have a very big face from the tech world perhaps contest and represent Bangalore as an elected representative?
Well, Nandan has gone on record that he is not going to be that face, so that we have on record. But that said, I mean, it was obviously a leap of faith that he could do, but I think there were very, very powerful forces. The question really is that does the political, I personally feel that anybody, tech or otherwise, tech leader or otherwise, if they have the inclination to be in politics, we need more of them, definitely, across the board. But they need to get in for the right reasons, because our problems are plenty. And the desire, I mean, we need to rediscover that idealism which really fired us at independence and get that mojos back and get a set of technocrats at one level, but other than technocrats, also from people from civil society, all engaging with politics, I believe is the way forward. So it's not just a question of one tech name, but more in terms of a collective movement for more people. You know, we may think politics is messy and, you know, all that stuff. It may be part of the problem, but is also part of the solution. And that's what people need to realize.
Right, Rajeev, I'm sure you have an insight on this, given the fact that you deal with both these on a daily basis, and you've made a transition yourself.
No, look, I think if somebody is saying that I'll build my resume as a techie and that is an automatic free pass to get into public life and politics, he or she is deeply delusional. I think, and I say this because politics and public life is public life and politics. I think where you came from gives you a certain tailwind, but it is really about working, it's serving, and it is a very different type of an experience or a different type of an responsibility. So I'm not so sure that saying a techie will get into politics or a space scientist will get into politics or a professional lawyer will get into politics is making it any easier for more and more people who have a sense of commitment to their community, commitment to their city, commitment to the country, entering politics. I don't think these are necessarily connected. But the corollary of that is true. Just because you are a techie, you are not disqualified from politics. Just because you are a government servant, you're not disqualified from politics. Just because you are an investor in techie, you are not disqualified from politics. Even though a lot of people may tell you that. So I think that is the better way to approach this, which is to say, I love my country, I love my state, I love my city, I would like to do something for it. And regardless of whether I was a techie or I was a expat CEO or a activist or whatever, I would like to now enter public life and serve my community, state, city, and country. So that works well. And I think that is the only thing that will work, whether you are in any kind of democratic politics, whether it's the US, whether it's India, whether it's the UK. Rishi Sunak is a classic example of a person who left the financial sector and has risen to become the Prime Minister of the UK. But he didn't do it because he was a financial sector resume and he was floating his Goldman Sachs background. He did that because he was a member of parliament. So I think to the young audience here, and I see a lot of heightened awareness about politics amongst the young Indians today, the real message ought to be, look, if that is something that you're passionate about, and you must be passionate about that, it really doesn't matter whether you have an MTech or a BTech or a BSc or a BA to do well in politics. And I think that is the truth of Indian democracy and Indian politics.
Right, interesting that you make that point, and I ask this question also because a lot of conversations, and perhaps in a changing digital world, you're talking of data privacy, you're talking of issues of this nature, which are very much the domain of people like you, which outside we really don't understand, but it impacts us on a day-on-day basis. How are we going to translate this highly technical, enormous information? And the reason why I'm having this conversation is also because in many ways, you are shaping the lives of 1 billion. People underestimate that, but the codes that you write and the technological advances that you do is shaping mind space across the world. So how are we going to make these complex arguments relatable to the grassroots? Do you even expect that to happen? Do you expect that to happen, Jay?
So, a lot of things happen in the background. that not necessarily has to be explained to a common man. As long as technology can take care of us, like security, right? I don't need to tell a common man how exactly it works, right? As long as the system works, as long as technology is there to assist the system, I think that's the benefit the common man gets. But in today's world, it is more about creating that awareness, which will take time. It's an evolution that has to happen and is happening. I mean, overnight, you really can't educate a billion people on technology. But as technology enters everyone's lives and makes a difference, of course, it will become a common language.
Manish, quick thoughts?
I think you're being a little patronizing to the common person. India is 2% of global GDP, but 40% of digital real-time payments. So when she says you can't educate people overnight, UPI, the target for UPI was 1 billion transactions a month. It's now 1 billion transactions a day, and we're already at 8 billion a month. So I think you're underestimating the aspirations of people. I know you said that, well, I have a grouse against Sindhu's salary or somebody's net worth. I actually think people view techies or digital as aspirational in many parts of India. It is not, socialism is a philosophy built on jealousy. But I think, or sort of zero-sum game. And I think the current thinking of India's youth, and India is a very young country, I think they really view the future of India very differently than the earlier generation did.
So quickly may I ask this question then, that my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that largely the IT industry is aimed at Western markets and catering to the creme de la creme of Indian industry.
Not true.
Not at all.
I may be wrong. Now, how much of investment from private sector is there for GovTech and social technologies that are taking technology and what you're talking to the grassroots? How much of that investment is actually happening?
Significant, Veera. To the earlier point on data and privacy of data, a lot of the things that is being built here in India is also based on the India stack, right? This is also the focus that the government of India had very clearly in kind of leading that digital first nation setup. And today, a lot of the young entrepreneurs, many of hopefully are also sitting here, are building on that India stack, and a lot of the things around designing of systems is built into it so that you can focus on those very niche areas which you want to change, where you want to kind of create an impact. I'm seeing a lot of entrepreneurs going back to their areas, be it in Gujarat, where they're looking at using technology to solve problems around how do you desalinate water, make water potable, just as one example. Or go into rural parts of Pune to figure out how do you support the agrarian society there. So there's quite some investment that's going into leverage that, because I told you at the beginning, right, the consumption of technology is also significantly on the rise. So for many of the large corporations like ours, the fastest growing region is actually in India, right? So to leverage all that, the ecosystem of the GCCs, the startups, the academia that we have here, the young talent, which is just booming, it's really all coming together in terms of also justifying that investment.
Agreed, Ravi?
First thing, to simplify, I think ChatGPT will do it very easily in multiple languages. We are getting there very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So technology. Yeah. The other thing, you mentioned about the West being client. I think we are reaching a stage where they're going to be clients for the India stack and the digital payments, etc. Because I recently had my brother-in-law and wife here. They were zapped with the way with which we were digitally dealing with in this country. We are light years ahead of the US in the way we do those kind of transactions. So I really think you're going to see some different kind of clientele emerging for the kind of things that are getting innovated out here. So I really think the role of, we started with techies, but techies and technology companies in some kind of reverse transfer, I think you're going to see more of that going forward. That's my hunch.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Rajeev?
So I think you asked a slightly different question. And the question was, in these sophisticated areas of policy making, how does the techie get involved, and how does the government create capacity and capability?
Yeah, if I can just take that, add one more to that. How do you translate these conversations that you have on your Digital India consultations with even the grassroots politicians of this country?
So I think that is going to be a challenge for governments all over the world. which is as we get into this increasingly disruptive, tech-led world of ours, especially in the post-COVID world, governments all around the world are finding themselves capability and capacity-wise behind the private sector and behind the innovators, in terms of just capability. And so that is a question that governments are asking all over the world, including our government. And our Prime Minister has come up with a beautiful model which he pioneered in 1516 that works excellently even today, which is that government will work in partnership with the tech community, the tech, people in the tech ecosystem, the startups, the large multinational companies, the large Indian companies. And every policy framework that we are building for the future is built not by a bureaucrat, not by some group of government officers, but in a partnership that involves pretty much everybody that is of the profile on this panel and the young Indian startups that are increasingly crowding the space of tech in India and are increasingly setting the tone. So I think in 2014, when we talked about tech in India, it was the Infosys, the TCS, the Wipros, and they had done a fabulous job in the last 14 years. But today, as we look forward, that tech ecosystem is very, very diversified. And that pie has grown rapidly big. And the policies, the frameworks, the government rules are all being built at every step in this very, very interesting partnership. I'll give you an example. For semiconductors, we are now going full hog. The entire talent roadmap of creating 85,000 semicon engineers was designed and built by a task force headed by Jaya Jagdish. So that is how we are preparing for the future and creating a roadmap for the future.
Right. The conversation's now gone to a technical level, but we'll bring it back to focus on the Bangalore level because we have a large audience here, most of them possibly first-time voters as well. We'll get in their questions, get in their concerns, get in their issues. Before I get the first question in, let me take a quick poll. How many of you are first-time voters in this audience? Because one of the concerns is while the number of first-time voters has increased, the participation in an election has actually reduced. Is that a worry? Before I get the first question, I will just ask a very quick question to the rest of the panel. And as we go on creating a society, we've spoken about urban apathy, are we creating another generation which is possibly in greater disconnect, if I may say so, with the grassroots? When you say it's work in progress, quick response from all the panelists, are we in the danger of creating another generation which is further disconnected given the fact that they are in the digital space, as you're pointing out, and they are in a very preset social atmosphere? Quick response.
No, I don't think so at all. I think I consider this generation the most fortunate generation, the luckiest generation in the history of independent India. And I think, this is my 49th campus that I'm visiting, I think the young Indian today is an extremely aware young Indian, extremely well-informed young Indian, is a very smart young Indian. And of course, they will take their decisions. I certainly don't think that you can characterize this generation of students or young Indians as anything but like pretty much everybody else in society and as plugged in or as not plugged in.
Quick responses from the rest of you? Yes,
I
sir.
agree.
You agree. Manish?
I mean, I don't know whether people were... Nostalgia is usually amnesia, right? I mean, every generation believes that the next generation is less well-behaved or less respectful of its parents or less hardworking. I mean, Socrates said that 2,000 years ago, and it's not true.
I agree with Minister Rajeev that today's generation is, in addition to everything what was said, I think also very purpose-driven. They want to make the change, right?
Looks like I'm the only one who's disconnected.
I think there's a consensus in the panel that clearly this generation is quite involved and much more
aware of
aware.
Socially connected. Yes, let's take the first question from the audience now. Please.
So good evening to the amazing panel we have today, also to the fellow students here. So my question goes like, today's startups are a household talk in India, especially after shows like Shark Tank and everything. It's a household talk where people talk about startups. The students here are not discussing jobs today, but they're discussing how they can do some startup and just change the world. But one concern is funding, where many startups don't get proper funding, and when they get like the angels and the VCs, just lower the valuations to get more shares. And also one more as infrastructure. So how is government and also corporates and the VC are planning to just make sure this happens in well and the entrepreneurship and startups grow in India? Thank you.
Look, let me give it an attempt, and then if you're not happy with me, maybe you can get another answer. Look, I think you must also understand that you're a lucky generation, but you're also the most competitive generation. Now, for every one of you who wants to start a startup, down the road is another group of youngsters who also want to start up. So this is a very competitive world. So to expect that funding will come to you on a platter or that you will get the valuation that you want is to misread or misunderstand what being a startup is about. This is not an easy, Shark Tank makes it sound very easy about walking in and saying, this is difficult, this is competitive, but the smart, determined, persevering young Indian will succeed. On valuations, look, don't get into that game. There is a Russia-Ukraine war, there is risk aversion, valuations will decline. There is a Masayoshi Son who comes again from Japan, valuations will go up. This is something that is par for the course in the tech space. So I wouldn't get too obsessed about whether you're getting the right value at the right time. There is no such thing as perfect timing on that. But I completely agree with you. The future, the next decade is what the Prime Minister refers to as the India Techade, a decade full of technology opportunities. And he has said this on the August 15, 2021, that India Techade will be architected and built by young Indians. So that is the amount of faith that this country has on your generation in building the future.
And on that decade, it's heartening to hear that more people want to be entrepreneurs rather than work for someone. And that's very heartening. And as Rajeev said, it is survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
And you have to be prepared for that. But the good thing in this generation is failure is not a bad thing. You brush yourself off and start all over again. So it's that can-do spirit that was spoken about earlier that is important. And that's it.
And from a corporate point of view, if I may add, right, you have phenomenal support systems in place in terms of startup accelerator programs that you can also lean into, right? Access to technology, access to platforms, access to also complementary business capabilities that you would bring in as niche areas, access to markets. All that's possible, right? So the time is right. You have everything in place, but you need that true grit and true resilience to stay put.
Let's
it's the
take the
best
next
time
question.
in independent India to start a company. I worked in pre-reform India. I spent 15 days out of my month in Delhi. Shastri Bhavan, Yojana Bhavan, DTD. We never had marketing, we had distribution. We didn't have treasury, we had accounting. We didn't have HR. We didn't have clients, we had hostages, right? It was a very difficult place for a first-generation entrepreneur to do business. My parents were civil servants. Without venture capital, I could have never started my companies. So I think that, you have to be careful when you say that life is difficult right now for entrepreneurs. Actually, it's the best time in independent India to start a company.
Right, let's get another question in from the audience. Shrikara, there.
I'm glad the way we've seen the growth in Bangalore, and we are very happy about it. We have been experiencing this in the last 10, 15 years, and it's rapidly growing, and we foresee a compounding growth effect in Bangalore going forward. But my only question is, how are we going to trickle down the growth to a nearby city like Mysore, Tumkur, Hassan, Kolar, rather than we going far away to Hyderabad, Gurgaon, and other tech cities? What are the measures that have been taken so that it trickle down to a closer place than we just going out to a faraway place? I do accept that there is a talent that is far, and we need to go there, but I think we are losing an opportunity which is close by as well. So I just wanted to understand what could be the measures that could be taken to have this.
See, so Bangalore has a unique problem. We are 10 times larger than the next city. There's a ZIPS law which says ideally the next city should be half the size of the largest, the third one, 1/3, etc., which we don't have. So we have a concentration out here. Your point is valid that we need to develop the larger thing, but that's where government has a role to play, where you need a regional outlook And you look at the regional outlook in terms of both live and work kind of centers with great connectivity. And I think we are getting there with the kind of airport initiatives, the road network and the like. You need a social infrastructure in those places. So it will need a concerted effort by government, which does all these invest conferences. They want people to go to Belgaum and Gulbarga, etc. But unless they give the enabling infrastructure, physical and social, is not going to happen. So that is going to take some time.
A quick response to this. In 2014, there were 5 or 6 cities tops in India that cornered 97-98% of all IT and digital economy revenue. Today, there are 24 cities in India. This process is now accelerating post-COVID, where work from home, remote working has become now something that is more acceptable. And I actually think that over the next 5 years, you will see a rapid expansion of digital opportunity and tech opportunity into cities that are smaller cities.
Right, so focus goes further down, trickle down, as they say, in terms of the rest of the cities. Yes, go ahead at the back. We'll get somebody from the back.
Good evening, sir. My question is directed to Mr. Rajeev, sir. You have had the entrepreneurship, you've dabbled in entrepreneurship before. So I'm a BBA student. Most of us would graduate in the next 2 or 3 years. My question is, what advice would you give us? Would you want us to work, or would you want us to risk it like you've done and go into entrepreneurship?
No, I mean, I'll just tell you, in the morning I was at a Risk 5 technology conference with Jaya here, and 2 young students walked up to me who are Indian Institute of Science students who are doing their masters there, and they came and asked me exactly the same question, saying, we are doing very well, we've got this offer from AMD, we've got this offer from Intel, and I said, you're crazy, do a startup today. Not crazy because they got an offer from AMD, but because, like so many of the panelists have said, the planets are so heavily aligned in your favor today. There is capital, there is opportunity of a kind that has never been there before in this country. So I think if you have the temperament to work hard, to read well, to study, to work, be determined on this, I think it's a no-brainer. You should do something on your own. What is the worst that can happen? You will fail, but you will learn from that so much that when you go and apply for a job later on, if you want to do that, you will find that that experience will give you a premium.
So tell me something, if everybody is going to do a startup, who's going to work for that startup?
No, look, I want to give, this is a question that's been asked multiple times to me, and I think startups are not the conventional model where there is a founder and there is employees alone. There are groups of people who are coming together to build startups. So there are multiple co-founders. And it used to be in the old days that there was one founder or 2 founders, and then they went and built something. But now this has increasingly become amongst young Indians and young students all over the world, that you actually get together 6, 7 people, and that becomes the force multiplier for a startup.
So the idea of that salary on the first of the month is going for a toss, one that we've all lived with. Let's get one last question in from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
In your words, how is the government working to create more favorable regulatory environment for entrepreneurs, particularly in terms of reducing the bureaucratic hurdles and promising innovation, especially in IT hub like Bengaluru? And followed by, in your opinion, what is the most promising sectors of entrepreneurship today and why?
Okay, but before we get an answer to that, can we just take one more question and then answer both together quickly?
So my question is directed to you, Mr. Minister. Sir, in the beginning, your opening statement was like people coming from the other parts of the India to the Bangalore are most welcome. They are open, like you can consider yourself as a part of the Bengaluru. But I come from North India, and when I came here and I was traveling in the metro train, I saw that the Hindi language, the instructions given in Hindi are being scratched off, and there have been some stickers put over that. So do I consider seeing that the technological growth or any other growth which is there in this very Silicon Valley that we call do I consider this growth as an upgrading or the downgrading growth? Because seeing that people are not okay with the Hindi language, just the instructions written over there, they are not open. They consider themselves as an orthodox or the reluctant towards their own language or kind of something. So my question is to you, sir.
As much as we in Bengaluru welcome everybody from around the country to work, live, and contribute to our city, our communities, Uh, the fact is that this is Bengaluru, this is Karnataka. There are centuries of culture, heritage in our city that we are very proud of. So when we say, or somebody says something on Hindi, it is not about Hindi as much as we would like Kannada to be also highlighted and presented in these signboards. So please don't interpret this as being anti-Hindi as much as it is about pro-Kannada, pro-Kannadiga, pro-Karnataka, pro-Bengaluru. So we welcome everybody, but we have absolute commitment to protect our heritage, value it, respect it, and we would like every visitor to do the same. So don't think this as something that is confrontational.
Manish, would you like to just add a point to that question?
India has 29 languages. English is like Windows, it's an operating system. You can get away with that. Give everybody their culture, their language. I mean, identity is a complex question in India anyway. We're a multiracial, multi-religious, multilingual country. And so let's not worry about right and wrong. Let's just live and let live.
Right, and I'll just get Ravi.
No, as far as your question is concerned, in Raji, I mean, it's really about reducing friction in the ease of doing business. And you spoke in the context of technology, etc. I think having someone like Rajeev, who's been on this side of the fence to be part of government, is about the best thing that can happen. Because I believe that you need an appreciation of the other in these kind of situations. So one is hopeful that with people like him, everything is a work in progress. Things cannot be changed overnight because there is that, I think you call it regulatory cholesterol or whatever, Manish uses that term. It takes time for that cholesterol to dissolve and the thing to flow. But I think we are in good hands with people like him, technocrats at one level who understand how government works. In fact, I would go one step further, and since I have the minister here and I have some industry people, Rajeev, I really think we should think, and I really believe the future is more people from private going and doing stints in government, people in government doing stints through sabbaticals. We need to do more of it. If 1,000 firms in Bangalore gave sabbaticals to 5 people with per organization with more than 5 years experience and send them to work with government, you will see huge change. Because I really think we need to just improve the conversation of understanding each other. Each of us have their own lingo, and that's really, I feel, the way ahead.
Which is where I started the whole conversation.
Which is just to add to what Ravi said, I just want to tell the students here, the government has a program. If some of you want to say, let's say I want to do 1 year in government, we do accept interns. There are many people in my ministry, for example, who are students from the IIMs and the other colleges who come and do a 1 year stint and a 2 year stint. So it's really up to students to say that we want to do a stint like that.
I was quite amazed to see the type of students, doing the internship with METI.
Well, he's going to get a lot of bios after this.
The lady also asked a question on which sectors to invest in. I think healthcare, education are all perfect areas.
Yeah. Rajeev, you shared that democracy is work in progress. Yes, I don't think anyone can deny that there is a slight disconnect that's there. How do we build a more inclusive society where we're not living in bubbles and one understands each other? And this may not be restricted only to Bangalore. I'm talking of large urban centers as well, which are supposed to be leading the growth story of India.
Look, I don't want to try and propose a solution in this brief time that I have, but I certainly want to leave this thought with everybody, which is, we are the 5th largest economy in the world. We are within the striking distance of being the 3rd largest economy in the world in the next 2 to 3 years. This generation is going to inherit and are going to be stakeholders in a very different India. And a lot of this depends about keeping the momentum alive, keeping the narrative of a good government, good governance intact, and being participants in democracy, voting, registering to vote, going out on voting day, and voting for your future is the best way, in my opinion, to bridge any gap, real or imaginary. And certainly, leaving that aside, certainly in terms of building a better future for each one of you individually and collectively.
Right, Jaya?
Yeah. In fact, technology is reaching the common man, both directly and indirectly. Indirectly, it's actually touching all the sectors, including farming or medical electronics. These are all advantages that are given to the common people. And direct contribution from many of the corporates comes through CSR activities. There's a lot of funding that goes into not just financial help, but also voluntary work that the techies do. So a lot more can be done in that regard, and that's a way to directly connect with the people.
Quickly, just to point out, when you say CSR funding, Satva, which does the consulting, does data analysis and says that most of the CSR funding goes into Bengaluru, very little to rural pockets and areas where there is a huge disparity that is there. So perhaps time to introspect as well. When we say there is no bubble, agreed, Manish, but isn't there a need to introspect as well on how to move forward and how to perhaps take everybody along in this great success story?
I think so. I mean, I landed in the US in August 94. There was a front page article on the Wall Street Journal which said that India is more interesting than important. I hope that journalist is eating the newspaper on which he wrote that, right? Because what's happening in India is not once in a decade or once in a millennium. It's once in the lifetime of a country. So we can't change the past. We have to sort of focus on the future. And I think that democracy is a feature. We have had China envy for 10, 15 years with their economics, but I think their democracy or their society is not keeping up. So I would just think about every country, every life, every career, every company as a sort of work in progress. And the gap between our aspirations and our reality is not a lie, it's a disappointment. And a disappointment is just, we can solve it quickly.
Okay, quickly, Sindhu, is there a sense that my vote doesn't matter? Is that what keeps the large?
No, I think every vote matters, right? And that I think is the key thing, to enable each one of ourselves with what's happening and get involved, right? Because there are a lot of things that you can do if you get involved, understand, drive the change, bring people together to drive the change.
And I'll leave the last word with you, Ravi.
We need to bridge the trust deficit between government and citizenry. And I think digital technology, transparency can help in that. The second, I think at the people level, particularly the middle class and the better off, need to develop an inclusive mindset.
Perhaps a realization that the success that you enjoy today is a product of generations of hard work, not just yours. As always, Bangalore always throws up fascinating conversations, both tech, social as well. And perhaps this conversation will keep going on in the city, and all our first-time voters will participate more and seriously in social, electoral, and political process. On that note, thank you very much for joining us here on Decoding Bengaluru. We'll keep these conversations going from this city as we head into another Karnataka election.